Hello, dear friends. Before we begin, if you find this story worthwhile, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss similar stories. As you listen, if any part of this touches your heart, please leave a comment to share your thoughts with everyone. I love knowing that my stories are reaching people from all corners of the country. You are Eleanor Vance, and the world knows you through the perfect snapshots of an enviable life. In 1969, as the country churns with the great upheavals of war and civil rights movements, your world seems to be an oasis of peace, enclosed by a pristine white picket fence and the scent of the dahlias you tend to each morning. This small town in Virginia is your stage, and you, at 29, are the leading lady in a play about the model family. Every morning you wake before the sun, not to an alarm clock, but to a habit ingrained in your very being. An unspoken responsibility called the perfect wife. You slip out of bed quietly so as not to wake Julian. The kitchen is your first kingdom of the day. The smells of flour yeast and melting butter mingle as you knead dough for the morning bread. It is the scent of stability, of love, a scent you believe can ward off any and all anxieties. When Ethan and Clara, your two little angels, wake with sleepy eyes, everything is ready. You brush Clara's hair, the soft locks like silk slipping through your fingers, and listen to your 6-year-old chatter about her colorful dreams. You check Ethan's school bag, making sure your intelligent 8-year-old son hasn't forgotten the book he's in the middle of reading. Watching your two children chirping at the breakfast table, their clear laughter filling the house. You feel a tangible happiness, a warm satisfaction spreading through your chest. This is the life you chose, the life you have built. And then Julian comes downstairs, always dapper, in a perfectly pressed suit, exuding the dependable air of a model bank accountant. He gives you a light peck on the cheek, a gesture that has become more habit than passion. He sits in his usual chair, picking up the morning paper like an invisible shield. You place a hot cup of coffee in front of him, just the way he likes it, not too sweet, not too bitter. You watch him turn the pages, his face hidden behind the text, and a subtle sense of distance seeps into the room. You are separated by only a dining table, yet it feels as if there is an ocean of silence between you. This is the first crack, a feeling you try to ignore every day. Outwardly, you are the perfect couple. Julian is respected throughout the town. He always remembers to give you gifts on anniversaries, beautiful but somewhat impersonal presents, as if they were checked off a to-do list. When guests visit, he will put his arm around your waist, tell charming stories, and look at you with an adoring gaze that makes the neighbors sigh with envy. You smile back, playing your part perfectly, feeling the warmth of his hand, but unable to shake the chill in your heart. Because when the last guests leave, when the door closes, that warmth vanishes. The silence returns to envelop the house. It is not the peaceful silence of two kindred spirits. It is a heavy silence, thick with unasked questions and unheard answers. You try to start a conversation, telling him about a new sewing order, about a funny story from Clara's school. Julian will nod, murmuring a distracted, "Hmm," his eyes seeming to look straight through you, lost in a place you are never allowed to enter. You wonder, are you asking for too much? Doesn't every marriage have its ups and downs? He is a good husband. He provides for the family, never raises his voice, always maintains the image of a respectable man. You have a warm home, 2 healthy children, a beautiful garden. You have everything a woman of this era could wish for. So why late at night, when Julian is fast asleep beside you, does the sound of his steady breathing make you feel so profoundly alone? Why do you feel like you are just a beautiful housekeeper, a decorative object in his perfect life? And then there are the business trips, always on the first Thursday of the month. Bank business is all he ever says. You never ask for more. Once you tried. You asked who he would be meeting, what the work entailed. His eyes turned ice cold, a stranger's gaze that made you shiver. You have a roof over your head and food on the table. You don't need to know more than that. Those words, though spoken calmly, were like a steel wall erected between you. They made your position clear, an outsider in your own marriage. Since then, you've never asked again. You just quietly pack his suitcase, press his expensive shirts, and wave goodbye with a smile, a nameless anxiety growing in your heart. That anxiety feeds on the smallest details. The door to his study is always closed, an inviolable sanctuary. Sometimes you hear him whispering on the phone, the call ending abruptly the moment you walk into the room. You see him quickly tucking papers into a drawer and locking it, a furtive act that doesn't fit the honest image he has built. You try to reassure yourself. Perhaps he's under pressure at work. Perhaps he just wants to protect you from outside worries. You bury yourself in your sewing, the steady rhythm of the needle, and thread bringing a temporary peace to your mind. Your mother was right. Having a skill of your own helps you feel less dependent. The money you earn from sewing, though not much, is yours alone, a small secret, a safety net for a future you dare not consider. It gives you a fragile sense of autonomy, a tiny spark of light in the gilded cage you live in. You look around your home. Everything is clean, orderly. The family portrait hanging in the living room captures the beaming smiles of all 4 of you. It is the proof of your happiness, evidence you present to the world and to yourself every day. But sometimes, when the late afternoon sun slants through the window, casting a golden dust over the furniture, you feel this house is like an elaborately constructed stage set. Every object is in its place. Every role is performed flawlessly. But behind the velvet curtain, in the depths of your soul, a void is spreading. You love your children more than anything, and it is for them that you continue to perform in this play. You want them to grow up in a whole family. You want to protect their innocence from the complex truths of adulthood. So you keep smiling, keep baking bread, keep being Eleanor Vance, the perfect wife. But you know deep down something is wrong. There is a sense that you are walking on thin ice and that a single crack could send your entire world crashing down. You don't know where that crack will come from or when, but the unease is constant, like an underground river flowing silently beneath the foundations of your happy home, waiting for the day it will break through and destroy everything. And you, the woman who seems to have it all, are living in fear, waiting for a truth you're not sure you want to know. Sunday, August 17, 1969. Your mother's birthday. May she rest in peace. The day your life, like a perfect porcelain plate, was dropped and shattered into 100 pieces, never to be whole again. It started with a pain. Not the dull ache in your soul you had grown so accustomed to, but a physical pain violent and impossible to ignore. A migraine had attacked you last night, and by noon it had become a cruel torturer. It felt like a sledgehammer was pounding a savage rhythm inside your temple, each heartbeat a sharp nail driving deeper into your skull. Bright spots danced before your eyes, turning the familiar house into a blurry, tilting space. You had tried lying down, had tried the herbal teas your mother taught you, but the pain would not relent. It was a monster, and it was winning. In a moment of desperation, a thought flashed Julian's painkillers. The strong pills he brought back from New York, the only weapon that could subdue this monster. But they were in the one place you were never allowed to go, his office. Julian's office was his sanctuary, a forbidden territory. A man needs his own space, he had said, and you, the perfect wife, had always respected that. That door, though unlocked when he was away, was always an invisible line you never dared to cross. But today, the physical pain roared, drowning out the vague fear of your husband's displeasure. Respect for the unspoken rules was crushed under the weight of the agony. With hesitant steps, you pushed the door open. The air inside immediately enveloped you. It was thick with Julian's scent. Tobacco, old paper, and the expensive imported cologne he only wore on his business trips. The room was somber, imposing, with its dark wood desk and towering bookshelves. Everything exuded an order and power that did not belong to you. A feeling of guilt crept in, but the throbbing in your temple urged you forward. You knew the pills were in the top drawer of his desk. You pulled it open, trying not to make a sound. Inside was a jumble of personal items, pens, paper clips, scraps of notes. You rummaged through them, your heart pounding in your chest. Just then, a wave of intense dizziness hit you, and the world spun. You grabbed onto a nearby bookshelf to steady yourself. And that's when it happened. Your hand had dislodged several books. The leather-bound Bible, a family heirloom, Julian always displayed with pride. Though you'd never seen him open it, lost its balance and fell to the floor with a dry thud. A flash of panic seized you. Julian would be furious. You quickly bent down to pick it up, intending to put everything back exactly as it was to erase all traces of your intrusion. But as the book fell, it had opened, and from between its yellowed pages, a small, neatly folded piece of paper slid out and lay silently on the rug. You froze, Your first instinct was to scoop up both the book and the paper and shove it back inside to pretend you had seen nothing. But something, a cold curiosity, a dark premonition held you back. That paper wasn't a bookmark. It was too small, too personal. With trembling hands, you picked it up. The paper was thin and old. You slowly unfolded it, your heart beginning to beat in an erratic rhythm. The handwriting was familiar. It was the handwriting of Gideon, the bank's director, Julian's best friend. And then you read the words written in slightly faded blue ink. 7 words. Just 7 words. If she finds out the truth, kill her. Time stopped. The air was sucked out of your lungs. The migraine vanished instantly, as if it had never existed. In its place, a cold numbness began to spread from your chest, freezing every muscle, every cell in your body. Those 7 words repeated in your mind, a nightmarish chorus. If she finds out the truth, kill her. Who was she? Your heart clenched. Was it you? And what was the truth? What kind of truth was so terrible that the price of discovering it was death? A death coldly planned by your husband and his best friend. Your legs gave out, and you staggered into Julian's leather armchair to keep from collapsing. You stared at the note, the letters seeming to dance, mocking your naivety. 10 years of marriage, 2 children, thousands of breakfasts, countless times you had trusted this man. Was it all a charade, an elaborate performance where, if you, the leading lady, accidentally read the wrong script, you would be permanently removed from the stage? The panic didn't come as you expected. The terror did not erupt into screams or tears. Instead, after the initial shock, a cold stillness, a terrifying clarity settled over your mind. It was as if a storm had just passed, and now, in the quiet wreckage, you could see everything clearly. You were no longer a wife grieving a betrayal. You were a cornered animal, and your survival instincts surged to the forefront. The profound sense of deception didn't crush you. It ignited a fire of rage, and more importantly, a fire of resolve. Mechanically, you stood up. Your hands were no longer shaking. They were surprisingly steady. Carefully, you refolded the note exactly as it was. You opened the Bible, found the page in Proverbs from which it had fallen, and gently placed it back. You closed the book, returned it to its precise position on the shelf, adjusting it down to the millimeter. You erased every trace. Then you went back to the desk, found the bottle of painkillers, and took one out. You went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and swallowed the pill. Not because the pain had returned, but because that is what the Eleanor of yesterday would have done. You had to maintain the facade. You lay down on the living room sofa, closed your eyes, and pretended to rest. But inside your mind was no longer a chaotic mess of pain and fear. It had become a machine, sharp, cold, and operating at full capacity. The questions were no longer why, but what, when, and how. When Julian returned home with the children late that afternoon, you had made your decision. You would not confront him. You would not run. Confrontation could be a death sentence, and running would leave your children in the hands of a monster. No, you would stay. You would act. You would become the most perfect wife he had ever known. And while you acted, you would watch. You would listen. You would find that truth, and you would not let it kill you. On the contrary, you would use that very truth as a weapon to save yourself. That night, as you served dinner listening to your children's laughter and Julian's casual remarks, a profound change had taken place. On the outside, you were the same Eleanor. But inside, the naive, devoted wife had died in Julian's office that afternoon. A different woman had been born from the ashes of betrayal. A woman who was strong, determined, and ready to do whatever it took to protect her life and her children. Your play had just begun. Your play had begun. Each day was a performance, and you were the leading actress in the drama of your own fraudulent life. The tension became your constant companion, a cold fog that enveloped you even in the most ordinary moments. You lived in constant fear of being discovered, every action, every word carefully calculated. In the morning, you still prepared breakfast as usual. The smell of toast was still fragrant, but now it was part of your camouflage. You placed the coffee cup in front of Julian, smiled, and asked about his day while your heart hammered against your ribs. A frown from him, a scrutinizing glance, an unexpected question. Anything could send a jolt of panic through you, a fear that your mask had cracked. You watched him the way prey watches a predator, memorizing every habit, every gesture, searching for any vulnerability. But alongside that fear, something else was rising from deep within you. It was a strength you never knew you possessed. The betrayal hadn't broken you. It had shattered the invisible gilded cage that had held you captive for 10 years. Every morning when you looked in the mirror, you no longer saw a passive, resigned wife. You saw a warrior. Your eyes, though veiled with gentlenesses, now held a cold resolve. You had one goal: survive. And to survive, you needed to know the truth. Your first opportunity came a week later during the mundane task of ironing the shirts for Julian's next business trip. Your hand glided smoothly over the silk, but your muscles were as taut as violin strings. As you picked up his suit jacket, a thought struck you. The pockets. A place for secrets. Your heart leapt into your throat. He could come back at any moment. If he caught you snooping, it would all be over. Fear screamed at you to stop. But the new strength inside pushed you forward. Your hand, trembling but determined, slipped into the inner breast pocket. Your fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. You pulled it out. It was a receipt from a jewelry store in Richmond. Your eyes scanned the total. It was staggering 3 times the monthly household allowance he gave you. And then you saw the item, a diamond engagement ring. An invisible knife stabbed you straight in the heart. An engagement ring. Not a casual gift, but a promise of a new life. The pain was sharp, searing. You thought of the simple wedding band on your own finger, of your 10 years of sacrifice. All of it devalued by a diamond meant for someone else. But immediately after the pain, A jolt of determination shot through you. This was it. The first piece of concrete evidence. It confirmed your darkest suspicions. The pain didn't weaken you. It hardened your resolve. In the same pocket, you found a small card with an address in Richmond. You didn't dare write it down. Instead, you repeated it over and over in your head, etching it into your memory like a vow. You carefully placed everything back exactly as you'd found it, smoothing the crease on the receipt, ensuring no one could ever know it had been moved. You continued ironing, but now every stroke of the iron carried a cold fury. Now you had an address. You had to go there. This required cunning, a skill the old Eleanor never needed. You began to craft stories, carefully constructed lies. You told Julian you needed to go to Richmond to find a special fabric for a demanding client. You mentioned a distant cousin who was ill. Each lie slipped from your lips with surprising ease, as if you had been doing this your whole life. This was the transformation. You were no longer passively accepting his stories. You were actively creating your own. The drive to Richmond was a nerve-wracking journey. You constantly checked your rearview mirror, terrified a familiar face would see you. When you found the street, an elegant and beautiful neighborhood, your heart sank. The house was far more beautiful than yours. The pain flared again, a bitter comparison. You parked around the corner, watching from a distance, feeling like a criminal. You knew you couldn't just sit there. You needed confirmation. Taking a deep breath, you got out of the car and walked toward the neighboring house where a woman was watering her flowers. You put on a friendly, rehearsed smile and made casual inquiries. Each of the neighbor's words was another nail hammered into your bleeding heart. The young teacher, Stella. She's expecting a baby. Her fiancé visits every Thursday. And the final killing blow. He's just finalizing things with his ex-wife. His ex-wife. You were the ex-wife. You had been erased from his future, reduced to a problem, to be solved while you were still cooking his meals, washing his clothes, and sleeping in his bed. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. You had to bite your lip to keep from crying out right there. You thanked the woman and walked away, your feet heavy as lead. But on the drive home, the tears didn't fall. Instead, there was a brutal clarity. The pain had been distilled into pure resolve. You now knew her name, knew about the baby, knew about their plans. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than you had ever imagined. This truth didn't kill you. It armed you. You knew you needed more. There were still critical pieces missing. You remembered a strange key you had seen in Julian's shaving kit months ago. At the time, his dismissive answer had satisfied you. But now, with a mind sharpened by suspicion, that memory returned with a whole new meaning. Waiting until Julian was at work and the children were at school, you began your most dangerous search yet. Your home was now a minefield. You searched his office, the locked drawers, the pockets of suits he rarely wore. Your heart pounded with every small noise from outside. The fear of being caught made cold sweat break out on your forehead. Finally, inside, a hollowed-out book on his shelf, ironically titled Ethics in Business. You found the key. It opened a small metal box hidden deep in the bottom of his closet behind the travel bags. When you opened that box, the entire horrifying truth was laid bare. 2 train tickets to Argentina for Julian Miller and Stella Oliveira, forged identity papers, and a stack of love letters. Your hands shook as you read Stella's words, full of adoration for Julian and contempt for you, the woman who never deserved him. And then, in the most recent letter, you saw it. The final, cold and cruel confirmation, echoing the message on the note that started it all. As Gideon always says, if she finds out the truth before it's time, you know what you have to do. The tears finally came, not tears of weakness, but of ultimate pain and bitter release. It was all clear. Your marriage, your life was built on a foundation of lies and a murder plot. Sitting on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal and crime, you no longer felt fear. The pain had reached its peak and now gave way to a bone-deep anger and a fierce determination. You would not be a victim. You would not be eliminated. Carefully, you put everything back exactly as it was. The box, the key, the hollow book. You erased every trace. When you stood up, you were no longer the woman who had entered that room. The trusting, passive wife was dead. In her place stood a strategist, a survivor, a woman who had seen the true face of her enemy and was ready to fight to the end. That evening, when you smiled at Julian across the dinner table, your smile had never been more beautiful, and it had never been more deadly. You had the truth. Now it was time to use it. Those 2 weeks passed in a tense haze, a silent film in which only you knew the script. Now the curtain was about to rise on the final act, and you were the sole director, holding your breath in the wings. The day of the final, large money transfer arrived. It was a Thursday, the sky a cloudless blue, an eerie, deceptive calm that stood in stark contrast to the storm raging in your chest. You woke up and went through your morning routine on autopilot. You made breakfast, the bread still fragrant, but you tasted nothing. You dressed the children, your voice still gentle, but your mind was elsewhere, calculating every possibility, every risk. You were an actress in the most important scene of your life. Julian was tense too, but for a different reason. You could see it in the way he kept checking his watch, the way his fingers drummed impatiently on the table. Before he left, he did something unusual. He kissed you on the cheek, a kiss that lingered a moment too long, and he held the children tightly. You looked into his eyes trying to read him. Was it a flicker of guilt? Or was it the farewell of a man about to disappear forever? You didn't know, and that uncertainty felt like a noose tightening around your neck. The moment the door closed behind him, you sprang into action. No longer the passive wife, you were a strategist preparing for battle. You separated the most important documents, sewed some cash into the hems of the children's clothes and into the soles of your shoes. You packed 2 small go-bags with essentials and hid them under the bed. You were preparing for every scenario, including the worst-case one of having to flee in the night. You spent the day in a state of high alert. Every passing car, every ring of the telephone made your heart leap into your throat. You tried to keep busy, going to the market sewing, but your hands wouldn't stop trembling. Then Mrs. Irasima, the bank secretary, stopped by on the pretense of a dress fitting. She whispered to you, her eyes wide with alarm. "The police from the capital are at the bank, Eleanor. They came with the armored car. Inspector Mendez is with them." The news was both confirmation and a poison. Your plan was working. But it also meant the danger was at its peak. If Julian and Gideon felt cornered, they might act rashly. The only thought in your mind was the children. They had to be safe. You picked up Ethan and Clara from school, forcing a calm expression onto your face. You took them to Lucinda's house. Julian's sister, using the excuse of needing to finish an urgent order. Holding your children, inhaling their familiar scent, it took all your willpower not to break down. Entrusting them to Lucinda was the hardest but most necessary decision you had ever made. Now you were ready to face whatever came next. You returned to the empty house. The silence was terrifying, amplifying the ticking of the clock, each second a hammer blow. You sat in the living room, not daring to turn on the lights as evening fell. The sunset painted the sky a bloody red, the color of an ending. Time seemed to stand still, and then you heard it, the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder. 3 police cars sped down your street, heading toward the center of town. Your heart stopped. This was it. It was happening. Half an hour later, a frantic pounding on your door made you jump. You stumbled to open it, leaning against the wall for support, bracing for the worst. But it was Lucinda, her face, pale, completely out of breath. "Eleanor, have you heard Julian and Gideon have been arrested? They say they were trying to steal the entire payroll transfer for the textile mill. The whole town is gathering in the square." As her words registered an immense wave of relief. An overwhelming sense of deliverance washed over you. The weight you had carried on your shoulders for weeks of terror suddenly vanished. You didn't have to act anymore. You didn't have to be afraid. You were safe. Your children were safe. You leaned against the doorframe, pretending to collapse from shock. But inside, for the first time in a very long time, you felt like you could breathe. But the relief was fleeting. It was immediately followed by the harsh tsunami of reality. The scandal erupted. Your small town had never seen anything like it. Overnight, you went from being an admired wife to the thief's wife. The days that followed were a form of psychological torture. You became the center of attention. Eyes followed you everywhere, some filled with pity, some with morbid curiosity, and worst of all, some with suspicion. How could she not have known? She must have been in on it. The whispers were like needles against your skin. You felt naked, judged exposed before the entire town. The private pain of betrayal was now magnified into public humiliation. You wanted to hide, to disappear. The next morning at Lucinda's house, you looked out the window and saw a group of neighbors gossiping, pointing toward the house. Lucinda advised you to stay inside. But in that moment, the resilient woman inside you rose up. Hiding would only be an admission of shame. Hiding would make them think, men think you were guilty. No, you would not hide. You bathed, chose one of your finest handmade dresses, and applied a touch of makeup. You announced, I'm going to the market. The children need fresh milk when they wake up. The walk to the market that day was the longest walk of your life. It felt like crossing a minefield. You felt every stare heard, every whisper that died down as you approached. You held your head high, walking with a steady gait, though inside you were trembling like a leaf in the wind. You had refused to be Julian's victim, and you would refuse to be a victim of this gossip too. Then the financial reality hit. The bank sent a notice demanding you vacate the house within 30 days. The home where you had lived for 10 years, where your children had grown up, was being taken away. You had to explain to Ethan and Clara that their father had done something wrong and would be gone for a long time. Clara's innocent question, "Doesn't Daddy love us anymore?" was another knife twisting in your heart. In the midst of all the chaos and pain, your determination hardened into steel. You would not let your children suffer for their father's mistakes. You would not break. This town, with its painful memories and judging eyes, was no longer your home. Your future had to be somewhere else. You called Louise, your childhood friend in the capital. And then, with the help of the few true friends who remained, you began to plan your exodus. You sold what little furniture you could, packed away the memories, and decided what to bring into your new life. On the day you left, you dressed the children in their best clothes. You looked back at the house one last time, not with sadness, but with a strange sense of peace. Those walls held more lies than truths. At the bus station, as the bus began to pull away, carrying you and your children away from the town, away from the past, you looked at your reflection in the window. A 29-year-old woman with nothing to her name but 2 children and an uncertain future. But strangely, you didn't feel afraid. For the first time in years, you could breathe freely. The storm had passed. The wreckage was devastating. But you had survived. And on the foundation of that ruin, with your own 2 hands and an unbreakable will, you knew you would rebuild. Not a fake, perfect life, but an authentic one, all your own. 2 years had passed since you and the children arrived in the capital. 2 years of relentless effort, of long nights hunched over the sewing machine, and of carefully saved pennies. Life was not easy, but it was yours. You had built a fragile stability, a small, safe world for Ethan and Clara. Your home-based sewing business, though small, was beginning to earn a reputation. You had learned to be proud of the calluses on your fingers. They were proof of your independence and survival. You thought the past, though never forgotten, was finally behind you. But the past has a cruel way of finding you. It was a drizzly October afternoon in 1971, the kind of day that washed the entire city in gray. You were putting the finishing touches on an evening gown for an important client when a knock came at the door. Ethan, now 10 years old, ran to open it before you could remove the pins from your hands. Your son's voice called out, strangely hesitant, a reluctance that immediately put you on guard. "Mom, there's a lady and a baby here." You walked to the door, and time seemed to stop. Standing before you, soaked from the rain and shivering from the cold, was Stella. For a moment, your world shrank to that one face, thinner than in the photographs, pale with deep, dark circles under the eyes that had once captivated Julian. Everything inside you froze. Then the rage you had tried to bury for 2 years erupted like a volcano. Her, the woman who had planned a new life with your husband on the ashes of yours. The woman whose love letters had belittled you, calling you the woman who never deserved him. And now she dared to stand on your doorstep. The doorstep of the sanctuary you had built with your own sweat and tears. And what was that in her arms? A baby. The living proof of the betrayal. A child conceived while you were still a devoted wife. The fury made your blood boil. Your first instinct was to slam the door in her face, to shut it on the past, on the pain on the face that had haunted you. You wanted to scream, to chase her away, to tell her she had no right to be here, no right to contaminate the world you had fought so hard to keep pure. Every nerve in your body tensed, ready for the confrontation you had imagined 1,000 times during sleepless nights. But then your gaze fell to the baby sleeping in her arms, and the volcano inside you went dormant. The baby had chubby cheeks and long, curled eyelashes. He was breathing steadily, a completely innocent being, unaware of the tragedy that had created him. And then you saw it, a small detail with the power to tear through your anger, the baby's chin. It was the exact same chin Ethan had as a newborn. This wasn't her child. This was your children's half-brother. Your husband's blood, a part of your family, whether you wanted it or not. He was not guilty. He didn't choose his parents or his difficult circumstances. He was a victim too, just like you, just like Ethan and Clara. The rage dissipated, replaced by a much more complex emotion. You looked at Stella again, but this time you no longer saw a triumphant rival. You saw another woman who had also been deceived, who had also been discarded. The glamour from the photos was gone, replaced by exhaustion, fear, and desperation. You recognized the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her voice. You had been there. You knew what it felt like to lose everything, to have nowhere to turn. Julian had discarded her just as he had planned to discard you. You weren't enemies. You were two victims of the same man. This understanding didn't come as a rational decision, but as a self-evident truth. And in that moment, you knew what you had to do. It was not an easy choice. It went against every ounce of pain and hurt you had endured. But it was the only choice a person who had truly grown, who had overcome her own tragedy, could make. "Come in," you heard yourself say, your voice surprisingly calm. "You're soaked." Those were the words that carried the weight of your entire transformation. You were no longer the passive Eleanor, a victim of circumstance. You were the proactive Eleanor, capable of creating change, of turning the worst situation into an opportunity for grace. You led Stella inside, told Ethan to get a towel, and Clara to put on water for tea. You took control, creating a temporary safe space, not just for this other woman, but to teach your own children a lesson in compassion. As Stella told her story, her words only confirmed what you had already sensed. Kicked out of her home, disowned by her parents, and finally abandoned by Julian with a short, cold letter. He had made promises, painted a future, and then erased it all when she was no longer useful. She hadn't come for charity. She had come to ask for a job, a chance to start over. You looked at the woman huddled on your sofa and at the baby still sleeping peacefully. Your final decision was made. "I'm not doing this for you," you said, and the words were the absolute truth. "I'm doing this for your son who is my children's brother. And maybe I'm doing a small part of this for myself. It's time to let go of the hate. It's been weighing me down for too long." The decision to let Stella stay and work with you was the culmination of your growth. It was the final act of freeing yourself from the chains of the past. You weren't just forgiving her. You were forgiving yourself for ever believing a lie. You were choosing the future over the past construction, over destruction, compassion over hatred. That night when you explained to Ethan and Clara that the baby was their little brother and that he and his mother needed help, you laid the first bricks for a new definition of family. A family built not on perfect relationships, but on broken pieces, mended together with empathy and forgiveness. Your relationship with Stella did not begin with friendship, but with a reluctant pact for survival. But it was built on a foundation stronger than romantic love, mutual respect, and a shared goal. From the ashes of betrayal, you had not only saved a woman and a child, you had begun to forge a powerful partnership, an unlikely alliance that would reshape all of your futures. You had turned hate into hope. The following years passed not like a dream, but like a symphony of effort, creativity, and relentless hope. The era of survival was over, giving way to a new era, the era of building. You and Stella, once two women thrown together in a stormy sea, had now become skilled captains, steering your ship together toward calm and prosperous waters. The big break came in 1973 in the form of an offer from your most influential client. She saw your talent, Stella's business acumen, and she proposed a partnership to open a high-end fashion boutique in the heart of the city. It was a daunting leap of faith. The thought of a real shop with a display window and a prestigious address was both thrilling and terrifying. The weight of responsibility and financial risk was immense. That night, after the 3 children were asleep, you and Stella sat across from each other in the small kitchen. The warm yellow light illuminated sketches and papers covered in figures. You laid out the proposal, and you saw in Stella's eyes the same anxiety you felt, but behind it was a spark of ambition. "It's a risk," Stella said, her voice always carrying the caution of someone who had lost everything once before. "But it's also the chance we've been waiting for," you replied, your voice filled with a confidence that surprised even you. The discussion lasted late into the night. You didn't just talk numbers. You dreamed of a future where the children could get a proper education of a house with its own yard of a security that no one could ever take away from you again. And in that discussion, you realized your relationship had transcended circumstance. You had become teammates, partners, family. Finally, you made a decision together. You would take the chance. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity filled with laughter and hope. You and Stella transformed an empty space on Madison Avenue into an elegant and welcoming boutique. Stella revealed an incredible talent for interior design, creating a luxurious atmosphere on a shoestring budget. You buried yourself in designs, letting your creativity soar. On opening day, you looked around your boutique, Eleanor's Lumen. The name was an affectionate compromise between your classic taste and Stella's modern sensibilities. It wasn't a lavish event. There was only cheap champagne, borrowed glasses, and appetizers you had made yourselves. But it was perfect. Ethan, looking mature in his best suit, greeted guests at the door. Clara, with her charming smile, handed out small sachets of potpourri as party favors. And Charles, nearly 3 years old, became the star of the party, melting every client's heart with his radiant smile. Leaning against the counter, looking at the fruits of your labor, at your healthy, happy children, and at Stella, managing everything with effortless efficiency, a powerful wave of emotion washed over you. Pride, gratitude, and a profound happiness brought tears to your eyes. 4 years ago, you had found a threatening note in a Bible and thought your life was over. How wrong you had been. It had only just begun, and it began spectacularly. Eleanor's Lumen blossomed beyond your most optimistic expectations. Your reputation spread throughout the capital. You were no longer just the thief's wife. You were Eleanor, the talented designer, the creator of exquisite wedding gowns and elegant evening dresses. In 1975, the moment one of your wedding dresses was featured in a prestigious fashion magazine, you framed the page. The caption, "Elegance signed Eleanor," was your validation, your sweetest victory. The boutique's success allowed you to do what you had always dreamed of, create a truly good life for your children. You moved from the cramped apartment to a spacious house in Georgetown, with a yard big enough for the kids to run in and a private sewing studio out back, where you could find quiet to create. That house was the symbol of your triumph. It was not built on a foundation of lies, but with your own talent, hard work, and love. Watching your children grow up in that safe and happy environment was your greatest joy. Each child was a unique source of pride. Ethan, now a teenager, revealed a sharp, intelligent mind fascinated by science and engineering. He was the embodiment of stability and reason, a steady anchor for your family. Clara, your 12-year-old daughter, was a true artistic soul. Her sketchbook never left her side, and her ideas inspired the young Eleanor line, bringing a fresh new energy to the brand. And Charles was the sunshine of the family. Raised without the stigma of his origins, he was bright, vivacious, and called you Aunt Eleanor, with all the love in his heart. He was the living proof that tragedy could be transformed into a blessing. Your unique partnership with Stella also became a quiet legend in the city. Some people might still have whispered, but you no longer cared. Together, you had created a new definition of family, one bound not by social conventions, but by respect, deep understanding, and a shared love for 3 children. In the evenings, after a long day's work, you would often sit on the porch drinking tea and watching the children play in the yard. In those peaceful moments, you felt a profound contentment. This was true happiness, not a fake perfection, but a joy built from broken pieces, stronger and more real than anything you had known before. You had done it. From a betrayed woman facing death and disgrace, you had risen to become a successful entrepreneur, a proud mother, a symbol of resilience. You hadn't just rewritten your life story. You had composed an epic. You had proven that a storm doesn't always bring destruction. Sometimes it comes to clear the way, to uproot the rotten trees, and to give the strongest seeds a chance to reach for the sun. And now you were standing in your own garden, enjoying the warm sunlight and feeling a peace that had been earned with all your courage. 7 years had passed since you first set foot in the capital. 7 years is not a long time, but it was long enough for you to rebuild an entire world. Now, at 36, your life had found a peaceful and steady rhythm. Eleanor's Lumen was no longer a fledgling dream, but a respected brand, a symbol of elegance. The house in Georgetown wasn't just a place to live. It was a sanctuary, a space filled with the laughter of growing children, the smell of new fabrics, and the hum of creativity. You were no longer a woman living in fear or struggling to survive. You were a business woman, a mother, the master of your own life. The storm had long since passed, and the lake of your soul was now calm and clear. You had learned to master your emotions, not letting the past define or control you. You thought the old ghosts had retreated, deep into the shadows, until a June afternoon in 1976. You were adjusting the final details on an evening gown, your hands moving with skill and confidence when your receptionist hesitantly entered. "Mrs. Miller, there's a man here to see you. He says his name is Julian Miller." That name, for a split second, and only a split-second time, seemed to stop. The pin in your hand slipped, pricking your skin lightly. A vague, cold sensation ran down your spine. It was an involuntary reflex, a faint echo of the pain and fear that had almost killed you. But it only lasted a second. Immediately, your composure returned. You took a deep breath, feeling the solid ground beneath your feet, in the very space you had created. The woman who had trembled while reading that note years ago no longer existed. The you of today was someone else. "Have him wait in the sitting room. I'll be out in 15 minutes. You said, your voice perfectly calm. You finished your work with unwavering focus, gave instructions to your client, and then you walked toward your past. The walk from the studio to the sitting room felt like a journey through time. But this time, you weren't a passive passenger. You were the one leading the way. This was your territory. He was sitting there in one of the velvet armchairs you and Stella had chosen. And you realized it instantly. The power dynamic had completely inverted. Julian Miller, the man who was once your entire world, who had held your very life in his hands, now looked small and out of place in this refined space. 7 years in prison had stripped him of his confidence, his polish. His once black hair was now streaked with gray, and the suit he wore was clean but outdated. He was no longer the monster from your memory. He was just a tired, middle-aged man worn down by his own wrong choices. When your eyes met, you felt no fear or hatred. You only felt a vast distance, as if looking at a complete stranger. "Eleanor," he said, standing up, his voice uncertain. "Julian," you replied, your tone even. "Let's talk in my office." You led him to your office. Your office. You sat down behind your large desk, a position of power and control. He took the chair opposite you, looking as nervous as a job applicant. The silence was no longer heavy and threatening as it once was. It was just silence. He had come to ask to see the children. A request you had anticipated. You listened without interrupting, your face unreadable. You no longer had the need to punish or berate him. Those feelings had dissolved long ago, replaced by a quiet understanding. Ethan is 15 now, and Clara is 13. You stated matter-of-factly, they are not the children you left behind. The decision to see you is theirs. I will not force them. Your answer was fair and final. It came not from anger, but from a respect for your children's agency. When he asked about your personal life, you gently drew a boundary. My personal life no longer concerns you, Julian. Not since the day I found that note. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a truth you had accepted and moved on from. And then he asked the final question, one born of curiosity, or perhaps a flicker of late-stage regret. Are you happy? You looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time in many years, you allowed yourself to be completely honest with this man. I am happy, you said, and a serene smile touched your lips. I am happy despite what you did not because of you. The life you nearly destroyed ended up being the thing that set me free. You gave me a gift you never intended the chance to find out how strong I truly was. In that moment, you knew you were completely free. Not just free from him, but free from your past itself. You had forgiven. Not because he deserved it, but because you deserved peace. After he left, you stood by the window, watching his stooped figure disappear down the street. There was no sense of triumphant victory, only a quiet sadness, an acceptance of life's complexities. That evening you gathered your family. You delivered the news plainly and gave the children the power of choice. You listened to Ethan's angry refusal, Clara's curious agreement, and Stella's silent, wary observation. You didn't judge anyone's feelings. You were the pillar, the steadfast anchor, allowing everyone the freedom to feel and choose their own path. Several years later, another ghost from the past appeared. Gideon, the man who had written those 7 deadly words. He came not to threaten, but to plead. His fiancée Patience, after hearing the entire story, desperately wanted you to design her wedding dress. The irony was astounding. The man who had participated in a plot to kill you was now asking you to help create the happiest day of his life. 10 years ago, you would have thrown him out with all the contempt you could muster. But the you of today simply smiled. You saw a man trying to atone for his mistakes, a woman who loved him enough to believe in his change. You saw an opportunity to close the final circle. Your forgiveness was not a gift to him. It was the ultimate affirmation of your own peace. Come in patience. You said, your voice warm and genuine. Let's talk about your big day. As you led Patience into the fitting room, you felt a profound serenity wash over your soul. You were no longer the victim of a dark conspiracy. You were a creator of beauty, an architect of new beginnings, not just for yourself, but even for those who had once wronged you. You were in complete command of your life's story. The fire of hatred had been fully extinguished, leaving only the warm glow of acceptance, forgiveness, and a soul that had found its eternal peace. Now at 78 time is no longer a rushing river. It is a still lake on a windless afternoon, perfectly reflecting a life lived in full. You sit here in your familiar armchair on the porch, a warm cup of herbal tea in your hands, and look out at the garden you have cultivated for so many years. The space around you is a symphony of fulfillment. The clear laughter of your 6 grandchildren chasing each other across the lawn. The deep voice of Ethan, now a successful structural engineer, discussing something with Charles, who has taken over the family business with incredible acumen. Clara, your artist daughter, sits beside Stella, both of them looking over a new sketch, their smiles in perfect understanding sync. Stella, looking at the woman with silver-streaked hair, the woman life once cast as your enemy, who is now your dearest friend. The sister. You never had a deep and quiet gratitude wells up inside you. Your family, a unique mosaic pieced together from the broken shards of betrayal, is now a whole more harmonious and vibrant than any picture of perfection. And in peaceful moments like these, your mind often drifts to the past, not with pain or bitterness, but with a wise contemplation. You think of the 29-year-old woman who trembled as she read 7 deadly words on a scrap of paper. You no longer pity her. You feel grateful for her. You are grateful that fear did not paralyze her, that betrayal did not drown her in hatred. Because now, with the wisdom of age, you can see the entire picture. That note was not a curse. It was a blessing in disguise. It was the key that freed you from a gilded cage you didn't even know you were in. You had been living a perfect life. A life defined by society's standards, a devoted wife, a capable mother, a beautiful home. But it wasn't your life. It was a role you were playing. You were living for your husband's satisfaction, for the family's image in the eyes of others. Your true self, with all its strength, talent and will, had been dormant beneath that perfect veneer. That note in its cruelty shattered the veneer. The storm that followed was terrible. It stripped you of everything you thought was precious: your home, your reputation, your security. But after the storm passed, as you stood alone in the wreckage, you found something infinitely more valuable yourself. You no longer feel bitter when you think of Julian. The hatred dissolved long ago like morning mist in the rising sun. You see him now, not as a monster, but as a weak man who was destroyed by his own greed and deceit. His tragedy wasn't being imprisoned, but that he never learned to live an authentic life. In a way, he had been trapped in a prison of his own. Lies long before the law caught up with him. His passing in 1995 closed a chapter not with satisfaction, but with a quiet acceptance of the complexity of human fate. You learned that forgiveness is not a gift you give to others. It is a gift you give to yourself. Forgiving Julie and Gideon, and most importantly, Stella freed you from the weight of the past, allowing you to move forward with a light heart. And then you look at your children, the living legacies of your life. Ethan with his stability and reason. Clara with her artistic soul and soaring creativity. Charles with his intelligence and kind heart. All three are good, successful, loving people. The bond between them, which transcends all conventional lines of kinship, is your greatest victory. You proved that a true family is built on a foundation of love and acceptance, not rigid conventions. You look back on your journey and smile. It's miraculous how a death threat could become the catalyst for such a full and authentic life. You learned the most valuable lesson of all. It is not what happens to us that defines who we are, but how we choose to respond. You could have chosen to be a victim, to live in bitterness and resentment. But you chose to be a warrior, a builder. You chose to turn pain into strength, hatred into forgiveness, and tragedy into an inspiring success story. And that is the message you wish to leave behind. When you tell this story, it is not to dredge up pain, but to ignite hope. You want your grandchildren and all who listen to understand life will always have storms. There will be times you feel your world is collapsing, when the ground cracks beneath your feet. In those darkest moments, remember that it is not the end. Sometimes something has to break completely so that we can rebuild something more beautiful, more resilient, and more true. Do not be afraid of the ashes, for it is from the ashes that the phoenix is reborn. The late afternoon sun bathes the garden in a golden glow. A grandchild runs up and climbs into your lap. You hold them close, breathing in their innocent scent, and feel a deep contentment, a complete and total peace. You have lived a life worth living. The storm was brutal, but it brought you to a shore more beautiful than you could have ever dreamed. And for that, you are grateful. If you found this story helpful, please like and subscribe to Porchlight Diaries so I can keep sharing. Comment where you're watching from and which part touched your heart. Maybe it'll send a little hope to someone who needs it today. Thank you for listening with such kindness.